So my name's Ian. I am the Exec Director for IAB MENA, and I just wanted to take a moment to, as I say, thank you very much for coming. Thanks to many of you who have been involved in this process throughout, and hopefully today you'll get a really interesting view on the market from an Adspend point of view. The day will comprise some opportunity for you to spend time talking to your colleagues, so you will get a chance to talk again, don't worry. But we'll start off with a presentation specifically on the Adspend survey that many of you have been involved in. We've been doing this survey now for about 3 years. This is the third iteration of the survey. And every year we add a little bit more detail. We add a little bit more input from various parts of the region and from various of your companies. This year, the interview process, the expert interview process, included about 23 of our member companies and comprised numerous sessions, meetings, discussions with various people within those companies, covering a wide range of their divisions, covering a wide range of their expertise as well. So very, very robust expert interview process. The survey itself is not only expert interviews, it also takes into account modeling work, it takes into account desk research, and obviously inputs from other Adspend surveys, both globally and locally. So it's a very robust and relatively, we believe, accurate view on the market. But also importantly, it's a consensus view. So all the companies that take part have the opportunity to comment throughout the process. Obviously, the board of the IAB have the opportunity to go through the results in great detail, and we come up with a very consensus view of the marketplace. That this consensus view was what would bring the industry together to drive growth. Based on the attendance today, I believe that assumption was accurate. We are all here today to find out more about what we believe the market is doing at the moment. So I'll hand over to Dr. Knapp in a moment, who will take us through that survey. We'll then go directly from that survey into a panel discussion led by Chris Salome, who is the Research and Measurement Committee Lead for the IAB. This will give an opportunity for people from different parts of the industry to comment on the results, to give their perspective on what it means for us in the market, and to share their views on where this needs to move forward to in the future. You'll be pleased to know at that point, we'll stop for a cup of coffee. You'll get a chance to chat further about what you've seen, what you've heard, to chat to your colleagues, to chat to the panelists, to chat to Daniel. And after that, we'll come back for the retail media presentation. Directly after retail media presentation, where we'll share, as I said, some interesting insights about what's happening in retail media space, we invite you to join us on the 8th floor for a drink, a couple of snacks, and further opportunity to network with your colleagues. So that's kind of the flow of the day. Once again, I'd like to say thank you very much for making the time to be here. Thrilled that so many of you were able to make it. Before we get going, I'd like to call on Michelle Malkoon, who is the chair of the IAB MENA chapter, to say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. It's amazing to see all of our friends, colleagues, ex-colleagues here today. And we knew that the survey is very well anticipated for, but we didn't know that it's going to be that popular. And I'm not sure if it's because of the survey or because it's our first event after 3 years. So in both cases, we're very thrilled that you all are here. Seeing all these amazing faces here. So I thought I'll take this opportunity to just brief you a little bit on what we've been doing outside the survey. I know we've putting a lot of efforts and time to actually put this report together, which became the lighthouse on so many different fronts. But I thought it'll be interesting to tell you a little bit of where do we stand as IAB. So today, I think our community is 50 plus companies, which is an amazing number, knowing that we've started only from a Dubai focused point of view. We've rebranded last year from IAB GCC to IAB MENA, and we did that signaling that we need to actually approach the whole market and not just an optic from Dubai or in KSA. So going forward, all the reports that we've been doing, all the activities that we'll be doing, will have a local flair where relevant in the different topics that we're covering. But staying true to our vision, we're covering a lot of stuff, mainly on research and measurement. For example, we picked up two topics, attention and attribution. These topics have a lot of nuances. There's not a proper alignment, even on a global level, specifically on the attention front. So we've started these conversations with the committee, and we've linked with the international and global counterparts and colleagues to basically be in tune when the definition happens or when the new findings happen. We'll be among the first markets to actually announce it and do it. But also recently started covering other topics such as the digital out-of-home, CTV, AR, VR. So a lot of work has been done around that. And then we're very excited to actually share with you these findings when it happens. Now, outside the technical aspect of things, we've been covering things, and we've heard a lot of the companies. The two topics that are of concern to them is, for example, diversity and inclusion. So we've went ahead and partnered with the UN, for example, to drive. To be part of the UN for Women drive. We've done also recently, we've got the approval of being the allies of the UN Stereotype or Unstereotype Alliance. These topics will come to surface to basically raise awareness on these key issues that concern our industry. Now, by doing, I think, the other aspect that we think we should be extremely proud of is and it stays true to our mission, which is basically creating a platform where and that platform basically brings everybody to a nice place to think positive, to genuinely work on these on some key issues that concerning their clients, that concerning their agencies, and we basically park our ego outside the door, park our competition outside the door, and generally sit down and talk about real challenges, try to solve these challenges to actually have build an industry that is sustainable, that everybody can thrive from. So just to give you an example, and I think that's our biggest achievement today, is that we brought in over 100 people from our members to basically interact on so many different levels across so many task forces and committees. And with that, I think our output to market from a narrative point of view, from a reporting point of view, can only intensify as these committees starts producing these reports. So I thought just giving you an idea of all what we've been doing, but also I think today is a clear recognition of all the work that we've been doing. I can see a lot of the most senior faces in our industry present here today, from the head of Amazon to Meta to Google to TikTok, and everyone else is here to basically support us. So thank you so much for all the support that you've been giving us. And with that, I'm just not going to take more of your time. I'm just going to invite Dr. Daniel to actually go through the long-awaited for report. So thank you again.
Hello, a very good morning from me as well. My name is Daniel Knapp, and I'm the Chief Economist at IAB Europe, and I've been crunching numbers on digital advertising, well, since 2007. So I've seen many ad spend studies come and go and really see this industry move from its infancy, in a sense, a sideshow in media plans to really the center stage that it occupies in many countries today. We want to speak about ad spend. And before we get into the numbers, I mean, why are these numbers really important? Why is it important that we quantify how much money is generated in our industry? Clearly, it helps us to benchmark where do we stand in the region versus other territories. How do different parts of the region stand towards each other? Which formats is growth coming? What should I be investing in? How can we guide our clients to develop new innovations? How can we see white spots of opportunity? How can we develop standards, etc.? And lastly, it's also crucial for infrastructural development. It could be regulation, a big topic for us in Europe, of course. We spend a lot of time in Brussels talking about the numbers to demonstrate how important, how vitally important the sector here is actually for the economy, to drive consumer demand and to fuel further growth. We see globally that around $1 invested in advertising fuels around $7 in gross value add, i.e. knock-on effects on jobs and other value creation. So we are not just any other industry that publishes numbers on how it transacts. I think when we show our numbers, it's a foundation for a lot of how our economy operates and the fuel that we can bring to economic growth. But without further ado, let's dive in. We talked enough about the surroundings. About this study, what are we measuring and how are we actually doing this? First, as Ian said, it's a multi-method approach. We have interviews, we have some statistical modeling and other things. I'll go through the process in detail a little bit later. Secondly, it's important it's a sell-side focus. There are many different ways of measuring the ad market. In Europe, we have 28 countries contributing, and there are probably 30 ways of how they measure things. So we look at all money arriving at the sell side, after discounts, before commissions or SSP fees, which gives us a not rate card, not net, but a gross value. And this is something that is comparable to how other IABs across the world measure things. So we can take the MENA puzzle piece and put it into the global context. And lastly, crucially for this region, we needed to make a choice, what to focus on. Because there are, again, different views on the market, an import view and an export view. We are here, as a local community, we are taking the view of ad spend delivered to eyeballs in the region. So we're not looking at the export bit, although this is clearly a plan as it's a core component of how this market operates here. We wanted to get this thing right first, in particular because this is how other countries are doing it as well. 5 steps we're taking to do this. We're speaking to these 23 companies to understand in a survey how they think the ad market actually grew, how it's structured, which formats grew, which regions grew, and so forth. And of course, not everybody has the same view of the market, which is great because we know that some people are deeper into some topics than in others. We harmonize and put this together, and then we check corporate filings, SEC filings, other corporate releases. We check, we validate, otherwise we speak with other ad forecasters who put out forecasts from the holding companies and others. We look at macroeconomic benchmarks, how much did the economy grow, does that make sense? There's some typical ratios. We know advertising is a kind of fickle beast in a sense. When the economy goes up, advertising goes up more. And what we saw in Europe right now, when the economy goes down, advertising is a drama queen and goes down much, much, much further. So we have to establish those ratios. Do the numbers make sense in the broader context? And then we have workshops to validate this and arrive at a consensus view, which is very important as well. What are we covering? 16 markets kind of in here, which we're covering, and we're splitting them into different regions. And now with this preamble, let's release how big is the market in the MENA region delivered to eyeballs in the region. We believe in 2022, the market was worth $5.5 billion US. And this is coming after a very strong 2021. With a massive rebound, after the kind of COVID panic, we saw the explosion of e-commerce, of streaming services, people lived online. 2021 was the best year in the history of digital advertising for many markets, and for this region as well. We grew, remember, in 2021, 25.9%. Can we top this? Probably not, but many markets now see, because the comparison effects are so tough, moving down to single-digit growth. We were worried that this might not happen here as well, but it didn't. We actually grew by 20.1% versus 2021, which means that the growth engine of advertising continued. That's very different to what happened in many other markets across the globe. To put this in context, you can see we started the study in 2020, where the market was worth 3.6 billion. We had this massive growth here, this, in a sense, post-COVID bonanza that we had, but then the party didn't stop, and we saw this continued growth to 5.5 billion. And again, to put this in context, some of the other markets, US and Europe, grew half of how much the MENA region grew. Clearly, it's a more established market here. We have war in this market, but it's a very heterogeneous region. We got Turkey in here, other big markets which are still, with young consumers growing fast. And of course, in the US, we have a lot of innovation, new things coming in, CTV booming, retail media booming. But even these new boom formats couldn't lift the market to a higher growth. So we're double digit. What factors are behind this? I think you all know best, but I try to pick out 5 core drivers which supported this 20.1% growth. The first thing clearly is the World Cup, very obvious. We see typically the World Cup or other sports events, Olympics or the Super Bowl in the US, they act as cyclical drivers, i.e. in the year where they occur, a lot of ad spend is attracted to that. We saw the same here in the region, but there's something different here, and we come to that in a second. In many markets, these are cyclical drivers, i.e. one-off events. And we can see here it's different. There are structural drivers, meaning that the halo effect of these tentpole events lasts longer than the year in which they actually occurred. So, same with the Expo, actually. A lot of demand came here. Thirdly, I think we can see a lot of infrastructure development, in a sense, reframing an entire country, continent, how we operate, how we live together. This massive infrastructure development is crucial for the growth of the region as well. But what we also saw, when we look back a few years, digital advertising was predominantly a performance channel. Right? Measurability, bottom of the funnel, etc. What we saw as we had these events here, driven by that, we saw in particular growth also in brand spend. We measured this in the context of social media only, where we had some good signal to understand what was going on. And we saw that on social, that brand spend grew 2.9x faster than performance spend. And I think that's a very interesting number, because it demonstrates the maturity of digital advertising. We're not just driving outcomes. We can also drive brands. It's omni-channel, it's full funnel. And this data is very encouraging, and it's usually an indicator that the market is just systemically important for the overall ad economy. But we would be amiss not to speak about performance, because the overall rapidly ongoing digitization of the economy is fueling further ad spend. Typically, advertisers, large advertisers, allocate advertising as a share of total revenue. Right? So if revenue grows, ad spend grows. And we all know that since the 1960s, there was a symbiotic relationship between the rise of mass media and the rise of mass brands. Unilever couldn't exist without television, and television couldn't exist without Unilever. This has been an iron law of advertising for many years. But what's changing now is advertisers think of things differently now. They often also think of things called very boring accounting language, revenue management. How can I control, how can I manage revenue? When I bring in IT and software systems, how can I connect this to driving efficiencies? And here advertising becomes quite crucial. So we're seeing, in a sense, a new symbiotic relationship between the logic how companies operate, this revenue management in the ability of digital advertising to deliver such value. And this is another really, really important factor. And the interesting thing here is that all of the things that we're seeing here, all these 5 things, are structural drivers, not cyclical drivers, meaning they will continue to support the future growth of this market. But we all know digital advertising isn't one thing. There are lots of different formats, lots of different regions, so we need to disentangle this a little bit and understand how do different parts of the digital ad economy grow and how big are they, relatively speaking. And I'm now going to peel the onion a little bit for you. I start very top level, and then we're going to drill down in more detail into the nitty-gritty of the formats. So, first of all, we look at 3 buckets: total display, search, and an ominous other category. Display, you can see, has a lot of stuff in there. There's banners, there's native, there's special ads, integrated content. We've also put some newsletter ads in there, but fundamentally also video and social. So it's very important to bear in mind this language. When some people speak of display, they just think about banners, and they just think about the open web. We include in this top line category, in line with other IABs, social and video as well. Then we got the search bit in here. Importantly, it's not just the classical search in here, what we would call horizontal search, but also vertical search. We see an increasing verticalization of the search business, in particular in an e-commerce transaction environment, and also when we see how Gen Z is starting to search. They often use different destinations to begin their search than someone of my generation, to put it that way. And also we've got this other category, affiliates in there, classifieds, a very small but fast-growing audio market, and something that is uncategorized, which could be a hybrid of things. And we can see all of these three buckets grew double-digit, which is good news. We didn't see this in other regions of the world. We had double-digit growth in all of these buckets. If we split things out a little bit, right, and in particular look at this massive display category, we're splitting it out here into a slightly cumbersome language, but there isn't really a better way of putting it. Non-social display, social, we've got search, and we've got the other category. And this region is unique that the total display bucket is at 84%. For context, in Europe, it's at 49%. So we have a stronger emphasis on other formats, which is kind of a factor of how did the region evolve historically. You know, we are here in a market that is extremely fast in adopting new consumer trends. We have young markets, we have a video-centric market, where some of the old-grown structures and some of the older markets aren't there. So this means that the relative shift in formats, I think, or the relative distribution of formats here is different than we see in other markets. Let's dive a little bit into this big bucket here of social. So social growth outperformed other display growth and is also larger than the other display growth. So social grew by 26%, whereas the non-social display grew by 11.9%. But it's interesting that, again, it is a gap here, but the gap is narrower than what we see in other markets. Double-digit growth in social seems strong, in particular, as we saw already very high double-digit, I think nearly 50%, 40-something% growth last year. But it's, of course, the social space is diversifying with more video, with more players, increasing competition. This is driving things. And of course, also the massive long tail of small and medium-sized businesses, self-serve platforms, etc., are driving this. In the non-social bucket, though, other things are important as well. The video bucket, but as we come to also the increasing automation of the market, in particular around programmatic advertising, helped fuel the growth. Let's zoom out a little bit and go outside of social. Outside social, we could see this, right? We can see the banner and native bit, and we can see the video bit. Remarkably here, the growth advantage of video is actually extremely narrow. And in Europe, we had around a 2.5x gap in growth between display and video. I think part is that it's a very saturated category here in video. It's already extremely established, already, in some ways substitutes TV. And here in this bit, we saw the rising automation in the region with programmatic, again here, supported this growth. If we dive deeper into the social components, social, static, banner, and video, we can see a starker trend here, right? So social banner and native up 11%, but social video up nearly 50%. So there's a massive shift that we see towards video and social, and you can see it in the competition of formats that all the large platforms have, but also, I think, interestingly, that there's a lot of innovation in terms of how these formats interact with consumers, in particular so-called brand performance advertising. You see a brand for the first time, an e-commerce brand, but you can buy it directly. And this kind of hybridization of formats is fueling further growth, in particular as targeting with a brand perspective and driving to checkout can be seen in a single ad. If we now add the social and the non-social bit, what can we say about the relative size of the non-video bit and the video bit? Something remarkable happened this year. So here we got the video bucket, and here we got the non-video bucket, 2021 and 2022. We can see at the bottom of here is the non-social bit, up here is the social bit. If we add it all together now for the first time in this region, within the broad display category, video is larger than non-video. So we are officially in a video-first digital advertising market. Zoom out, comparison to Europe. Video share of total display stands, depending on the market, between 35 and 45%. So the region here might be less mature in terms of measurement and digital ad spend per capita, but it is further ahead in the video revolution than many of the peer markets in the EMEA region. Let's benchmark things a little bit and understand how fast did a format grow compared to 2021. Right? We now have in our study 2 years of growth. We have the 2021 growth and the 2022 growth. And we saw top line growth slow down from 25.9% to 20.1%. But not every format slowed down. Some actually increased by how much they grew. And you can see this here. So the factor one is growth in 2021 and 2022 was exactly the same. A number higher than 1 means actually 2022 growth was faster than in 2021. And we can see the non-social display bit, and in particular the display banner native stuff, it grew faster in 2022 than in 2021. Here, this is completely normal, right? With a very strong market here, the growth is slightly slower. I think here, this bit here is particularly owed to the automation and the programmatization, that is a word, of the market. And with that, let's come to programmatic. For the first time in this study, we're not looking just at formats, but we're also looking at transaction mechanisms. Now, when there are many different ways of measuring ad spend, there are even more ways of defining programmatic advertising. If we went across this room and asked for definitions of programmatic advertising, we'd probably, how many registrations do we have? Oh yeah, we have here over 100 people in the room. We'd probably get 100 definitions of programmatic advertising. So we needed, as an IAB, to synthesize this and understand what do we really mean by programmatic advertising. For some, it is everything that's automated, right? Whenever you buy through an automated platform using some kind of algorithms, it's programmatic. So social will be programmatic. Some are even saying, well, search is programmatic, or at least proto-programmatic. But then there are the purists who say, no, programmatic is only when you transact on the basis of the OpenRTB protocol. Nothing more, nothing less. The rest is just automation. It's not programmatic. So we need to understand, when we speak about programmatic, what story do we want to tell? What part of the ecosystem do we want to zone in on, right? So we're taking our banner display and our video social, excluding our banner display total, and video total, excluding social as programmatic. It includes YouTube, because you can buy it via DV360. So with that, so on a basis of around 1.5 billion, which is the sum of the banner and the video bit outside of social, we saw programmatic grew by 18.8% to just above $1 billion in 2022. All ad spend activated via a DSP is here the simple definition. And we can see that if you compare programmatic and IO-based spend, the share increased. Right? If we excluded some players, some components, the share would be lower. But in all of this here, we can say, in this part, outside of social, outside of search, we are in a programmatic first market where the continuing automation drives increasing shares of programmatic. I think it reflects how agencies operate, reflects the performance that customers want, and this is going to grow further. But of course, also we know that the programmatic ecosystem is undergoing rapid change right now with the deprecation of third-party cookies, with new targeting paradigms emerging. So this is not going to be a linear growth story. In the future, it's going to be a very exciting road with new winners, with new losers, but I think more opportunity than actually risks. Many are casting this privacy-first era that we're in, where programmatic is a big part of, as problematic for digital advertising. I believe that we are entering one of the most exciting and innovative periods that our market has ever seen. But we didn't stop here with the programmatic numbers because, again, programmatic isn't a monolithic thing. You can trade it in so many different ways. And we've got 3 buckets: open auction, private marketplace, and programmatic guaranteed or programmatic direct, depending on the language, right? So this market here is an open auction-driven market. We see some programmatic guaranteed as well, but we can see private marketplaces kind of squeeze in the middle. We know they're often hard to set up, they're hard to scale, but they can also be extremely valuable. But this is quite different from other markets where we see currently around, if we look at the US and Europe, the open display market kind of shrinking in terms of share at around 50 to 40%. So this region here has a quite different structure of how programmatic advertising operates. So far for the formats and the transaction mechanisms. Now let's dive a little bit more into how do these trends map out across the MENA region, across sub-regions, and also across some countries. We're not splitting out every single one of the 16 countries summarized in this study, but some regional buckets which I hope give you a little bit more nuance on how this growth was spread out across this very wide region. So, get started. Let's start with the growth. KSA grew faster than the market, and also the subtotal of GCC and UAE grew faster than the average. It's clearly reflected in the drivers that I mentioned initially, the infrastructural investment. We can see it in the Expo and in the World Cup very clearly, and also there are more digitally mature regions. Then in other GCC, clearly Qatar's in there, grew strongly, but other markets probably not so much, so there is a bit of a corrective factor here. Other MENA includes many of the Levant and North African markets. Some grew, some didn't grow. There are lots of structural challenges in those markets. And Egypt is an interesting outlier because depending on how you look at it, it could have grown, but also declined. But we're here talking about ad spend in dollar terms, and with a major currency devaluation in Egypt, so this is reflected here. This is why we have this 6.7% decline. And to just put this into magnitude, a little bit of a footnote, this is how this currency devaluation looked like, right? So if it hadn't occurred, the market would have grown tremendously. But we can see that this is the 2022 bit here. One dip, another dip, and then in Q4, another steep dip. So this contributed really to the 6.7% decline that we saw. Now, if we map things on a share, it looks like this. 2021 and 2022, we can see subtotal GCC has the lion's share, increased the share. Saudi grew by 3 percentage points. UAE grew a little bit, and then the other parts of the region slightly shrank in terms of the relative contribution. But this is really a snapshot. This isn't going to be a linear trajectory for the future. We believe there is significant growth potential due to high population and still just organic growth available in those markets as they mature. So the rising share of GCC isn't going to be a given here. We're not going to arrive at 99% at some point. Other markets in the next years will grow as well. Changing focus slightly to actually how is stuff transacted? Through which routes is money in this market being spent? Direct or via agencies? We introduced this for the first time last year and are providing an update here. And we can see that the share transacted via agencies increased slightly in 2022. This is clear because we saw this influx of brand advertising. We saw large marquee advertisers kind of pushing in the region. But whereas the rest, the drivers are structural, this might be cyclical. We don't know yet. Let's zoom out further and say this region here, the MENA region, operates in a broader region, the EMEA region. So I'm very pleased that we're building these bridges here, IAB Europe and IAB MENA. Let's do some calculation. We are here. MENA is a fraction.
Excuse me, can you go back to the slide?
Yes.
So when we talk about direct here, it includes the long tail, right?
It includes the long tail, absolutely, yes. SMEs, etc. A lot of e-commerce stuff. So not just the large brand advertisers, but a massive long tail of business, absolutely. So here, MENA is a small part of the EMEA total, right? We try to calculate this EMEA total by looking at the IAB Europe numbers, but also by looking at other numbers from South Africa, from Statista. So we're nearly at 100 million in the EMEA region. And MENA is 5.6% of that. That doesn't sound much. But I think we need to take a closer look, because there is something really interesting hiding behind those numbers. And this is, if we place the MENA region as a whole and individual markets in the MENA region, in the kind of 28 European markets that we're measuring, this tiny bit of MENA suddenly becomes an extremely large bit. So here you can see 36 markets. Some, these are in red are all the European markets that we cover. And in yellow are the bits we're covering in this study. So bear in mind there's double counting in here, right? Some is a region, MENA is a region, DCC is a region, KSA is a country. But it's quite remarkable because, of course, this region here cooperates a lot in a sense. So the region here is the 4th largest player in Europe right now. KSA is 11th largest in this ranking. And if we actually remove the regions, it would be the 9th largest market in Europe. And this is remarkable because actually last year, or this year, GCC overtook Spain and Italy. They're some of the big 5 markets, Germany, France, UK, Italy, Spain, the largest media markets in Europe. Italy and Spain lag behind in digital development, but the MENA region now is larger than that. And as I said, KSA, if we remove the regions, it would be the 9th largest market. So suddenly this 5.6% of the EMEA region, which doesn't look much, becomes actually quite significant. I think that's why it's important to think of ourselves here also more broadly within the EMEA context, as many budgets are being allocated on an EMEA basis. And also, we're some of the fastest growing markets, right? So here's growth in the European regions. And if we look at our markets here, the red bits here, again, at the top. There's an outlier here, Turkey. Who can suspect why Turkey grew by 93-something%? Yes, exactly. This isn't real growth, right? This is driven by inflation. We have far lower inflation here in the region, now depending between 2 and 5%, depending on which markets you look at. But we thought it's worth an exercise. So went to the World Bank data and took the headline consumer price inflation and applied this to our markets and to the European markets. And wow, does the picture change. If you remove this massive inflation in Turkey, 72% inflation. We're actually now the fastest growing markets in the EMEA region. And not just one, several markets in here. Right? Growth will be slightly lower if we factor out inflation. You have 15% for the region, but that doesn't really matter. The relative picture speaks. This is a high growth market, which is going to likely increase its position and share in the wider European context. But how will this future growth be activated? What's behind it? Clearly, overall development, ad spend per capita is going to increase, but I think on a performance basis, there are 5 different trends. One I already mentioned, these 10, and this I can't repeat this often enough. I think these 10-pole events we saw in 2022, there are infrastructural and growth drivers, not just cyclical drivers. And this is reflected in, I think, a positive outlook currently in the region. We know it can change due to some factors, but currently the outlook is extremely optimistic, and we know advertising over-indexes on economic growth. Secondly, I think in the future, CTV could be hugely powerful. We wanted to have it in this study, but it's still extremely nascent. We don't even have the data yet in Europe because there are different definitions and standards. But in Europe, it grew in a market that was up 10%, 46.6%. So it shows you the potential. Also, out of home is rapidly digitizing. And we believe, as an estimate, an IAB MENA estimate, that the overall digital out of home market was worth around $350 million USD. Bear in mind, this isn't necessarily spend we can activate today, because digital out of home has a very broad definition. Right? It's a screen that has digital lights on, and maybe you can change the creative, be it with a CD-ROM or be it with a local system. It's not necessarily connected to the internet, and not even to a DSP. which might just be 0.0 something percent of the total market today, but it's digitizing quite rapidly and is expanding the addressable market of digital. As Ian mentioned, gaming, mixed reality, highly attentive audiences is something that this market is tapping into as well. And then lastly, and we're going to speak about this after the break, retail media is a huge opportunity, in particular in the context of cookie deprecation and this perpetual dream that we have as an industry of closed loop attribution and measurement. So to conclude, what could we see from these numbers today? I think 4 things really stood out. We have these massive events that drive infrastructural development in the region. Social dominates, but others are growing as well, in particular due to programmatic. Video is a key pillar of the market. We're in a video-first market. And also, if we put ourselves in the wider European context, we're not 4.6%, 5.6%. MENA, if we take the region as a country, is the 4th largest in Europe, just behind UK, Germany, and France. And I think this room here is really a testament to this, because the audience here is larger than I see in some of the European IABs when the numbers are being presented. And with that, thank you very much for your time.